with our some of our favorite guests like Brian Murphy from WRAL in North Carolina. And Brian, this law that's in front of the legislature about North Carolina and North Carolina State playing schools like Charlotte or App State regularly through year over year, how, first of all, does it have a good chance to be passed? And second of all, how would the North Carolina and NC State folks react to it?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure how much of a chance it has to pass and how much of a messaging bill this is to sort of prod North Carolina and North Carolina State to schedule those games. The legislature here does a lot of things to make other people act without eventually passing that into law. I've gotten no reaction from North Carolina or NC State or ECU, Appalachian State, or Charlotte, the other schools impacted by this. I think all of even though I've reached out to all of them, I think they're all kind of laying low and seeing what happens, what develops in the legislature. I think the worst thing for one of them to do, particularly State and Carolina, would be to come out and say, this is a terrible bill. We don't want to deal with it. Please don't do this. And that might fire up the people that are pushing it even more.
How concerned are those schools that North Carolina will, particularly North Carolina? We don't know, in this realignment shuffle or the ACC exodus where NC State really falls. I mean, I think they're attractive to other conferences, particularly if they were open. The Big 12, I think, would certainly give them a ring. But for North Carolina in particular, how scared are those schools of never being able to play them in football and basketball?
North Carolina plays them in football. Like, they just had a home and home with App State. They've got a game against a series with Charlotte coming up. So I don't think they're scared. And NC State plays those teams routinely. I just think that this would put it in state law. This would force it to happen. I think the concern is more from an economic standpoint from the lawmakers, saying, why are you playing Louisiana Tech? Why are you playing Old Dominion? Why are you playing UConn? When you could just as easily be playing teams in our state, keeping all that money in the state. UNC played at Appalachian State, not last year, but the year before, and was an amazing game, went multiple overtimes, and, huge sellout crowd. There's estimates that it generated $15 million for the city of Boone and the county up there. And so I think this is really lawmakers who attended those schools, who represent those parts of the state, saying, hey, we want to see this routinely. I think that's the big thing, right? North Carolina will schedule games against ECU and Appalachian State, but getting them to go to those places, which is something the ACC doesn't want them to do, right? The ACC doesn't want its teams playing at G5s. That's how you lose games. That's how you downgrade the reputation of the conference. They don't want the teams playing at those schools. The lawmakers obviously want them playing at those schools.
Well, look, the ACC is not too far down the road. I'm sure they've knocked on the door. So I'm sure they've watched it. They've got other problems. Like, this is obviously probably far down their list of it. But it is interesting to see that going forward. I do wonder how many other states would try to do that. Like, I know it would probably come up here in Texas, Brian, but I don't think it would last very long because the two schools they'd be pointing at have turned their nose up on the rest of them years ago.
Right. And I mean, I think would be North Carolina and North Carolina State, same desire. I don't know if they have if the gap between them and the other schools is as big as it is in Texas. That would allow them to get away with it. The other thing to remember, the UNC has, and I'm not exactly sure how Texas works, but, they have a board of governors that's in charge of all 16 colleges in the state or 16 public colleges. So they have as much a responsibility to ECU and Appalachian State and UNC Charlotte as they do to NC State and UNC. So they're all governed by the same kind of board at the very top. And so they have, they'll say, hey, it's our duty to look out for those schools as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit different here.
Yeah.
It's a little different. All right. Now, when it comes to the ACC and and North Carolina in particular going forward, it seems like, when it comes to Florida State and Clemson, those schools are very united top to bottom in this is what we're doing, obviously, because they have filed lawsuits. North Carolina to me, I guess politically being in the same state where the ACC is housed and where the two of the 4 lawsuits are being tried, is just watching this from the outside. And there's a bit of a divide right now in that there are some very loud people who want out, and then there's some people who are more traditional who don't. How do you think it plays out for North Carolina in the long run, and then trickles down to schools like NC State and then the schools like Duke and Wake Forest who really, really don't want them to leave?
Right. And I think one of the important things in that bill that we were just talking about is it mandates that UNC and NC State play every year as well. Mm-hmm. Obviously not a problem right now that they're both members of the ACC, but if you look down the road, they could be at different conferences. So they're trying to get ahead of that potential issue. I don't think it's that everyone at UNC doesn't want to leave. Look, there are a lot of traditionalists who have, like the ACC, understand the revenue problems with the ACC. I think the difference between the loud voices and those who aren't calling is, what does the public posturing get you, right? Like, how is it in North Carolina's best interest to be so vocal about, hey, we want to get out of here? I just think there are some who have decided that that's not the best way to play this. They're doing all their work. They're looking at the options. They were part of that Magnificent Seven that considered breaking away from the conference in some way. I think they're doing all the steps. They're taking all the steps they need to take. They just don't want to be loud and vocal about, hey, what good does it do you to bash the ACC when it may be your home for the next 5 years, 10 years, all the way through 2036? Like, I think that's the approach. That's what differs. The two approaches, we're going to be very vocal about it, or the other approach of, let's work behind the scenes, do our work, but not be out there publicly bashing the ACC.
Brian, the ACC, obviously their misstep was years ago when they could have kind of doubled down on football. They tried to go the other direction and say, well, look, we're already a great basketball conference. Let's make sure everybody knows that. And, that served them, I think probably to the maximum that it's going to serve them. And they did not, because again, North Carolina hasn't won an ACC title in over 40 years. Clemson and Florida State, since Florida State joined the league, own most of those. Virginia Tech has a couple, and I know Maryland was in there once. There's, and they're not even in the league anymore. There's kind of upstarts, Pitt, that like pop up and get something. But for the most part, it's Clemson and Florida State who have won all these, and they're the ones who are going to leave. Do you see the ACC and particularly North Carolina maybe doubling down more on football than they have in the past?
I mean, to be fair, I think the ACC recognized this a long time ago, and they went after football schools. I mean, first of all, they added Florida State, right? Then they added Miami and Virginia Tech, who were supposed to carry the league in many ways, football-wise, and they just haven't. Virginia Tech plateaued and has fallen down. Miami just cannot get back to where it was. I mean, Syracuse has a good football tradition. I mean, they didn't take UConn, for example. They took Louisville over UConn, thinking Louisville is a better football brand than Connecticut. So I think the ACC tried. Where they struggle is they don't have the alumni bases of the Big Ten, which can generate massive ratings, even if some of those schools are mediocre in football. And they don't have just this deep-seated passion and loyalty that the SEC has. And so the schools that have that, Clemson and Florida State, I think you're seeing, are trying to make those moves. I mean, I saw Georgia Tech has like upped its budget. I know, North Carolina and NC State are doing everything they can in football. But you pointed it out. Neither of those teams have won a conference title since the late 70s, early 80s. For North Carolina and North Carolina State, it's not who they are to be top 15, top 10 powerhouses in football. And I think they can throw a lot of money at it, but we know that the top 15, really the top 10, doesn't change all that much decade after decade.
How much? What do you feel the gauge is on the strength of the league once, because Clemson and Florida State are leaving? Like that's the one thing I think the ACC won't say out loud, but because they don't want to, they hope that there's some sort of Hail Mary out there that convinces them to stay, or something changes financially for them, and they want to hold out the hope that they can keep it together. But Florida State and Clemson aren't doing this to stay in the ACC. They're doing this to leave, and they're just trying to find out the cost. Like, how much does it cost for us to leave so we can raise that money? That's all they want to know. So what's the gauge on the ACC after that happens?
I mean, I think that's the biggest question. And I think you can start to see kind of their strategy over the summer when they added SMU and Stanford and Cal. If they were to lose Florida State and Clemson and that's it, well, they've already backfilled. They've backfilled with P5 schools in the case of Stanford and Cal. They don't have to go looking at Memphis and UCF and USF, Connecticut. They've already backfilled. They have enough to keep the conference together. I think they learned some lessons from the Pac-12 when USC and UCLA left and everybody was looking for an exit ramp. I mean, I can see the ACC doing a couple things. One, I know Big 12 people don't want to think this, but I do think that there are some members of the Big 12 who would prefer to be with the schools in the ACC. I think, Stanford and Cal give them some clout academically, athletically in some ways that I think could help them lure maybe a Western division together. The other thing you could look at is, this league really talks about academics in a way that some of the other leagues don't. You have a Duke, you have a Wake Forest, you have a Boston College. Pittsburgh has very good academics. Miami is a private school. You've added SMU and the two schools out in California. Can you put together a league that is really good in other sports besides football and really, really good in academics that other schools, other colleges want to be a part of? I don't know how much revenue that gets you. I mean, and is it worth it to do that, or do you just go find the best athletic programs you could find? So I think the ACC has some options. There's also going to be a lot of schools in the ACC that don't have anywhere to go, quite frankly. And so it's in their best interest to keep the league alive in a way that I don't think was there for the Pac-12.
Brian, thank you so much. I know you're slammed busy all the time, and thanks for hopping on. And we will talk to you again as stories develop. You're our go-to guy. We love having you on the show.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Brian Murphy, WRAL. In the next segment, Jordan Edmonds.